In 1942, inside the deadliest prison in human history, a young man stood at the front gates, knowing if he made one wrong move, he would be shot instantly. What happened next is so unbelievable. The Nazis themselves refused to admit it for years. This is the story the guards swore could never happen, but it did. 1942. No one gets out. You know, when people talk about Auschwitz today, they use words like unimaginable or unspeakable. But here's the thing, we need to speak about it, because what happened there was very real and very calculated. This wasn't just a prison, it was a death factory designed by some of the most methodical minds in human history. The numbers are staggering. Double rows of electrified barbed wire, guard towers every 150 meters, searchlights that never went dark, and over 6,000 SS guards patrolling the grounds. The Nazis had turned escape into a mathematical impossibility. They'd calculated every angle, every weakness, every possible route out. And if somehow, by some miracle, you did manage to get past the fences, well, they had German shepherds trained specifically to hunt humans. They had a network of informants in every village for miles around, had a bounty system that rewarded locals for turning in escapees, but most importantly, they had fear. Pure paralyzing fear that kept prisoners from even thinking about escape. Because the Nazis had a rule. If one person escaped, they'd execute 10 random prisoners in retaliation. So even if you could get out, you'd be sending 10 innocent people to their deaths. Now, in this seemingly impenetrable fortress, there was a young Polish man known only as Prisoner 918. His real name? Kazimierz Piechowski. But names didn't matter much in Auschwitz. You were just a number tattooed on your arm. Kazimierz was 20 years old when he arrived at the camp in 1940. He was a Boy Scout leader before the war, believe it or not. The kind of guy who taught kids how to tie knots and build fires. Pretty ironic, considering what he was about to pull off. But here's what made Kazimierz different. He was what you'd call a natural observer. While other prisoners kept their heads down, just trying to survive another day, he was watching, learning, taking mental notes of guard rotations, shift changes, patrol patterns. He noticed that around 1:30 in the afternoon, there was exactly a 7-minute window when the main gate was less heavily monitored. Noticed that the guards in the watchtowers got lazy during lunch breaks. Most importantly, he noticed something that would change everything. But hidden inside that camp, he was about to discover a weakness, one so small the Nazis never saw it coming. So what was this weakness? Well, it wasn't in the fences or the guards or the dogs. It was something much more human, much more psychological. See, the Nazis had created such a culture of fear and absolute authority that their own guards had become, well, predictable. They followed orders without question. They never second-guessed a superior. Most importantly, they never, ever expected to be challenged from within. Kazimierz realized that the SS uniforms weren't just clothing. They were symbols of absolute power. When you saw that uniform, you obeyed. No questions asked. It's like a psychological key that unlocked every door in the camp. Now, here's the thing. Kazimierz wasn't the only one thinking about escape. There were others, prisoners who'd been watching and waiting and planning. But most escape attempts involved digging tunnels or cutting through fences. You know, the obvious stuff that guards were trained to look for? But Kazimierz had a different idea. Instead of trying to sneak out of Auschwitz, what if they walked out? What if they used the Nazis' own psychology against them? Alright, so he started recruiting. But not just anyone. He needed specific types of people for this plan to work. Okay, let's talk about the team Kazimierz put together, because this wasn't just some random group of desperate prisoners. This was like assembling a specialized crew for the most dangerous heist in human history. First, there was Stanisław Gustal Jaster, prisoner number 6438. This guy was a former Polish army officer who knew how to keep his cool under pressure. Then there was Lempart, prisoner Sensen Sibai, who worked in the camp warehouse and had access to supplies that others couldn't get their hands on. And finally, there was Eugeniusz Bandera, prisoner 8502. Now, Eugeniusz was crucial because he worked in the camp's SS clothing warehouse. Yeah, you're starting to see where this is going. But here's what's wild about this whole situation. These 4 men had to communicate their plan without ever being able to speak freely. Remember, there were informants everywhere. One wrong word to the wrong person, and they'd all be hanging from the gallows by morning. So they developed this system of coded conversations during work details. They'd discuss laundry, schedules when they were really talking about guard rotations. They'd complain about broken equipment when they were actually planning how to acquire SS uniforms. Now here's the thing. Getting the uniforms was just the first part. They needed something far more dangerous. Something that could get them all killed instantly if they were caught with it. So what was this? Dangerous something? Documents? Official Nazi paperwork? See, you couldn't just throw on an SS uniform and walk out the front gate. The guards would want to see orders, transfer papers, identification. The Nazis were obsessed with documentation. Everything had to be official, stamped, signed, in triplicate. This is where Eugenius's position in the warehouse became absolutely critical. Not only could he access SS uniforms, he also had access to official Nazi letterhead stamps, even blank transfer documents. But forging Nazi paperwork in 1942? That was basically signing your own death warrant. The Nazis had executed people for far less. Just possessing blank official forms could get you shot on the spot. So for weeks, these four men gathered what they needed. A few uniforms here, some official stamps there, pieces of a plan that individually seemed harmless, but together represented the most audacious escape attempt in Auschwitz history. And you know what the craziest part is? They were planning to escape on June 20th, 1942, right in the middle of the day. Not under cover of darkness like every other escape attempt. They were going to walk out of Auschwitz at 1:30 in the afternoon when the camp was fully operational. But first, they needed one more thing. A vehicle. Because walking out the front gate was just the beginning. Alright, so June 20th, 1942. The day that would either make history or end in a mass execution. The plan was insane in its simplicity. Kazimierz and his team would change into SS uniforms, grab forged paperwork claiming they were transferring a prisoner, and then commandeer the commandant's personal car. Yeah, you heard that right. They were going to steal the camp commander's car and drive it straight out the front gate. Here's where it gets really tense. At exactly 1:30 p.m., the four men met at a predetermined location near the main gate. They were dressed in full SS uniforms, complete with jackboots and peaked caps. From a distance, they looked exactly like Nazi officers. But up close? Well, that was a different story. These were malnourished prisoners who'd been starving for months. The uniforms hung loose on their bodies. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow. If anyone looked too closely, the game would be over. Kazimierz was carrying forged documents stating that he was an SS officer transporting a prisoner to a nearby subcamp. The other three were supposed to be his backup. Simple, clean, official. They approached the motor pool where the commandant's Mercedes was parked. This was the moment of truth. Either their disguise would work, or they'd be shot within the next 60 seconds. The guard steps forward. He narrows his eyes. And in that second, every life in the group hangs in the balance. So what happened next is still hard to believe, even today. The guard looked at Kazimierz's forged documents, looked at the uniforms, looked at their faces. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 10 seconds, he just stood there thinking. Then he saluted and handed over the keys to the Mercedes. No kidding. The psychological power of those SS uniforms was so absolute that this guard, this trained Nazi soldier, never even questioned whether these officers were legitimate. The uniform was the authority, and you didn't question authority. So there they were. 4 Auschwitz prisoners sitting in the camp commander's personal Mercedes, driving slowly toward the main gate of the most secure prison in Nazi Germany. But here's the thing. They still had to get past the final checkpoint. The main gate was heavily guarded, and the guards there were specifically trained to scrutinize anyone leaving the camp. As they approached the gate, Kazimierz rolled down the window and handed over their forged transfer orders. The guard examined the paperwork while the other guards looked over the car and its occupants. This was it, the final test. If these documents didn't pass inspection, if one guard noticed something off about their appearance, if anyone decided to double-check their story with headquarters, they'd all be dead within minutes. The guard looked at the papers one more time, then walked to the front of the Mercedes and manually opened the heavy wooden gate. And just like that, 4 prisoners drove out of Auschwitz concentration camp in broad daylight, waving goodbye to the guards as they left. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? For guys escaped from Auschwitz, They disappear into the Polish countryside. Maybe they survive the war, maybe they don't. But no, this is where things get really interesting. See, the Nazis were so humiliated by this escape that they initially refused to report it. Think about it. 4 prisoners had walked out the front gate wearing SS uniforms and driving the commandant's car. It made the entire SS look like complete amateurs. When the escape was finally discovered, the reaction was swift and brutal. Heinrich Himmler himself, the architect of the Holocaust, personally flew to Auschwitz to investigate. It's rolled literally. Several guards were executed. Others were sent to the Eastern Front, which was basically a death sentence. But here's what's really wild. The Nazis were so embarrassed by the escape that they actually tried to cover it up. They didn't want other prisoners getting ideas, and they definitely didn't want the story spreading to other camps. Well, that's where the story gets complicated. They made it out of the immediate area around Auschwitz. This was still Nazi-occupied Poland in 1942. The entire country was crawling with German troops, collaborators, and informants. Kazimierz Piechowski, our main guy, actually survived the war. He lived until 2017. Dying at the age of 98, he spent decades after the war telling his story, making sure people remembered not just that the escape happened, but how it happened. So why does this story matter? I mean, beyond just being an incredible tale of human courage and ingenuity? Well, first off, it proves that even in humanity's darkest moments, even when facing the most systematic evil in human history, the human spirit can still find a way to fight back. These weren't superheroes or trained soldiers. They were ordinary people who refused to accept that their situation was hopeless. But there's something else, something that I think is really important to understand. The Nazi system was built on fear and psychological control. It wanted prisoners to believe that escape was impossible, that resistance was futile, that the only choice was to submit or die. Kazimierz and his team proved that wrong. They showed that even the most totalitarian system has weaknesses, and sometimes those weaknesses are hiding in plain sight. The escape also had practical consequences. The Nazis were forced to completely overhaul security at Auschwitz. They changed guard rotations, implemented new identification procedures, and restricted access to SS uniforms and official documents. But perhaps most importantly, word of the escape spread despite Nazi efforts to suppress it. Other prisoners in other camps heard the story, and it gave them hope. It showed them that escape was possible even from the most secure Nazi facility. To this day, historians still call it one of the boldest escapes of the war. And when you consider what these 4 men accomplished with nothing but courage, intelligence, and stolen Nazi uniforms, it's hard to argue with that assessment. You know, there's something almost poetic about the fact that Kazimierz Piechowski, a former Boy Scout leader, used the Nazis' own symbols of authority against them. The same uniforms that represented terror and oppression became the key to freedom. It makes you wonder what other seemingly impossible situations might have solutions hidden in plain sight. What other systems of control might have weaknesses that we just haven't noticed yet? The story of the Auschwitz uniform escape isn't just about 4 men who got lucky. It's about the power of human ingenuity when faced with impossible odds. It's about refusing to accept that there's no way out, even when every rational calculation says you're trapped. If this story opened your eyes to just how incredible human courage can be, make sure to hit that like button and share this video. Let me know in the comments, what do you think gave Kazimierz and his team the strength to attempt something so dangerous? Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that history almost forgot. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in the darkest places, even when hope seems lost, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to put on the enemy's uniform and walk out the front door.